Congressman Richard Neal is our guest this morning from Washington. Let's go on the record. The chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee plays a huge role in turning Biden administration goals into laws. But with slim Democratic margins to work with, what can actually get done? Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR on this Sunday. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. We have reached the end of February, but not the end of the pandemic, so we continue to follow social distancing protocols here in Studio C in Needham. And our guest this morning is Congressman Richard Neal, who joins us socially distant enough. He joins us via Zoom from Washington, D.C. He has represented his district in Western Massachusetts for more than 3 decades. He is one of Speaker Pelosi's most trusted colleagues. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. Thank you.
Delighted to be with you, Ed, and Janet as well.
Thank you. Let's get right to it. Front and center, President Biden's first COVID relief package. How optimistic are you that the $1.9 trillion bill you put together still needs to go through the Senate, will make it to his desk essentially intact?
Well, the plan here is to have it on his desk by March 14th, and I've not seen anything yet that would indicate that we're going to do anything but that. This legislation that we have now moved through the House and making its way to the Senate will include a considerable increase in the stipend upon what we did in December, meaning that we're going to move that up by $1,400. There's extended money here for unemployment insurance that would take us through the end of August. And the child credit is expanded considerably, which is a huge social and economic victory. The dependent child credit for child care, understanding the number of women who have left the workforce and have not been able to return in the midst of the pandemic, is front and center, and also expanding the earned income tax credit. There's also $350 billion here for state and local governments to deal with the fact that more than 1 million local government employees across the country have lost their jobs. And we considerably expand the safety net, acknowledging that in the third quarter of this year, we should be returning to substantial economic growth based upon forecasts that have indicated people have paid down their credit cards. They've saved some money from the earlier rounds of COVID protection. And not to miss the point, the CARES Act, which we passed just about a year ago, saved the American economy. So I think these are all positive developments. The Senate is going to be dealing with a couple of issues that will be a peculiar challenge to that institution, but not to miss the point that this legislation is substantial.
You may not be able to get all the votes that you need for all of these things. For example, the $15 an hour minimum wage, is that a lost cause in the Senate?
I think the challenge is that the rendering that came from the United States Senate by the parliamentarian is pretty conclusive. And President Biden has said that he will not have Kamala Harris challenge that ruling. The Senate operates, as you know, with some very arcane procedures as they proceed to reconciliation. So I think that there will be an opportunity for us to proceed immediately. The money of $15 an hour is in the House bill that is passed. So that's a very important consideration. Whether or not the Senate can address that issue through the process of what is known as reconciliation, I think is a bit more challenging, but it could be done.
You mentioned cities and states. So how likely is it that will survive negotiations with Republicans? So you mentioned a substantial amount of money in there.
Well, the problem that we've had, and this is not a put down because I think that President Biden has tried valiantly to include Republicans in this legislation or the legislation that's going to come in the future. As you recall, I did a press conference with Governor Baker to highlight the amount of money that is going to come to the state of Massachusetts. It's pretty compelling. Early estimates are that Massachusetts could receive up to $8.3 billion. And a city like Springfield, my hometown, is in line to receive $100 million. So this is very important investment as we go forward. And I think that Republicans likely are going to want to play on the next round, which will be infrastructure.
So let's drill down even a little more. What about small businesses like restaurants and health clubs and daycare centers, things that affect everyone's daily lives?
Great question, Ed. In fact, there's $25 billion in here for restaurants. They were hit particularly hard. We extend the Paycheck Protection Program as well to make sure that the people that were in line for salary, they're going to be able to continue to receive this assistance. As I noted earlier, if somebody said to me, what was the most important thing that you did a year ago that has sustained the American economy, it would have been the extension of unemployment insurance. So we do all of those, considering that the trend line in terms of vaccinations has improved considerably across the globe, in the United States as well. We should be concerned about the variant. We're not on the other side of this yet, but much of the news in the last week or so certainly puts us in a positive trajectory.
You speak about vaccinations, and I know you have a relatively good relationship with Governor Baker, but has he failed, at least in these initial weeks of the vaccine rollout, or do you think it's been mostly a supply problem, as he seems to be indicating?
I think one of the challenges we have here is that it was the chaotic nature of how the federal government under President Trump undertook much of the vaccination process. If you recall, the president dismissed it as flu early on. I think there were people in the National Institutes of Health and the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, who were caught back-footed and they were afraid to say anything. So I think that the laws of supply and demand don't change. I mean, no matter how many times that's been argued. So I know that in conversations I've had about Western Massachusetts and Central Massachusetts, I use Southbridge as an example, the Eastfield Mall in Springfield. I suggested in West Springfield that we use the exposition grounds. And I know at Berkshire Medical Center, they've done a really fine job of getting these vaccines out the door. So I think that it's been uneven, that's for sure. But I also think ascribing blame in the chaotic manner in which this was first acknowledged from Washington would be unfair.
You seem to be indicating that you feel that the governor has done the best he could possibly do, given the circumstances, that he can't be blamed for the sort of the chaotic signups that people are experiencing right now.
Well, I think part of the challenge we have is the collapse of the website. I think that that's inexcusable. I think we all understand that. But I think there were so many people dependent upon it that to have it crash the way that it did indicated that the demand side was out distancing the supply side in terms of vaccination requests. And so I think it's hard to ascribe any blame to anybody other than the previous administration, who was very slow to roll out their plan, if there ever was a plan. I mean, Joe Biden said yesterday that in the short period of time, 30 days or so that he's been president, 50 million Americans have been vaccinated. And he plans to have that up to 100 million. I think the momentum that's been developing is going to get far beyond that. But you can see that there is now a new plan that's shaping what June will look like in America.
Mr. Chairman, let's talk about schools. I mean, tomorrow in Boston, the schools K through 3 are going to open up. And so the question is, are there enough safety protocols in place for Massachusetts schools to allow all students who want to be in the classroom to go back to the classroom now?
Well, I think that we all want the schools open quickly. We want them to be open safely. So I would hesitate to tell superintendents or school committee members and mayors when the schools ought to open based upon the safety precautions that they've constructed. But recall that part of the early CARES money that we used, it was for improved ventilation, and many school systems took advantage of that. These children need to be back in school.
Do you think that teachers need to be fully vaccinated first?
I think the science says that it could be uneven, but I do think that getting the vaccinations to the teachers as quickly as we can should be a priority. Yes. The whole issue here, Ed, is confidence. And establishing that confidence is still beyond our grasp. So I think that the broader lesson here is until we defeat the virus, it's going to be hard to see how the economy and schools and others reopen. So I think establishing a level of confidence and competence in the delivery system is paramount.
I want to talk about college loans. Senator Elizabeth Warren is pushing aggressively for student loan forgiveness. President Biden hinted he might consider a $10,000 maximum per student. Do you think the president should go bigger, or he should go at all on this?
Well, I think that the president's correct in establishing at least a marker of $10,000. Here's the hesitancy that I would offer. I don't think wealthy people should be excused from the debt that their children accrued. I mean, if we're talking about the Rockefellers here, then I think that they ought to be able to pay the bill. I think that trying to make sure that there's a means test for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum makes enormous sense as it relates to student loans. There are too many children across the country who are living in their parents' basement or in their attics because they can't spread their wings. And when you look at the opportunities that exist, part of it is that risk-taking that would come when they don't have that debt that is accrued to the point where it's impossible for them to pay down the debt simultaneously and invest in a home or a rental property or something of that sort. So I think trying to decide what the income guideline would be is the better argument.